Hey there and welcome back to another Miraculous Ladybug video. And today, I want to talk a little bit about the character of Felix, because if you've watched my channel much before, you'll probably know I think Felix is great. He's definitely one of my favourite characters in the show, and in fact, I think you can make the case that he's probably the best and most consistently written character in the entire Miraculous franchise. And of course, that is a very bold statement, especially since he's a relatively minor character in terms of his overall screen time. And on top of that, the writing has been improving across the board recently. But when you boil it all down, I think it becomes quite clear that he's probably the best character in terms of characterization, backstory, personality, and arc. And he's also clearly one of the writing team's favourite characters to use. And I suppose that before we jump into all of that, we should have a brief recap of who this dude is and his role in the story. Felix is Adrian's cousin, who's introduced to the story for the first time in the Season 3 episode, Felix. In that episode, we learn a little bit about his character. And this backstory has been filled in more and more as he's continued to appear. We learn that he was the victim of an abusive father who mistreated him and probably mistreated his mum too, and that he clearly had a close relationship with his Aunt Emily, judging by the way that he stares adoringly at her painting. And also, he had a close relationship with his cousin Adrian. I mean, we're told outright that he and Adrian used to be very close. However, after Emily and his dad passed away, he seemingly has become cold and closed off, angry at the world. He lashes out at Adrian a little and casually tries to ruin his life in an afternoon. And he clashes with Gabe a bunch over the rings. Over the course of Season 4, he appears a little bit more and continues his manipulations and machinations, eventually managing to get his hands on the Miraculouses that Ladybug had in her miracle box, and thus, he trades them and the ring for the Peacock Miraculous, which in turn fleshes out his connection to the Senti monsters and sees him go on his own little personal crusade throughout Season 5. And so yeah, that's probably the bare bones of his story, and honestly, writing all of that down, it doesn't seem like a lot. But when you factor in how much happens in such a short span of time, it suddenly becomes a whole lot more impressive. Just think about how much this dude manages to get done, how much the story progresses when the guy's on screen. It's actually very impressive. But of course, we'll come back to that later. Back on topic, Felix is, in my eyes, the best written character in the show. And there's a number of reasons why this is the case. And I'll go through them each in turn. But probably one of the biggest ones is that he's three-dimensional. Like his personality, his traits. He isn't some one-note, one-track mind sort of character, like a lot of the characters in the show. He actually has a whole lot of depth. On one hand, you have the more negative aspects of his personality. He can be randomly cruel and vindictive, like when he tried to drop a bomb on Adrian's personal life. Or like when he genocided the entire world, despite most of them having done literally nothing to earn his hate. And then on the other hand, he can be quite sweet. Like when he tossed Marinette into a dumpster to protect her from the aforementioned genocide simply because she was precious to Adrian. Or how he goes out of his way to look out for Kagami and break the control her mother had over her. Or just the way he speaks about Emily. Or the way he interacts with his mum. It's just so much, and I know a lot of characters do have depth as well, but it doesn't feel like it's as much as Felix. A lot of the secondary and tertiary characters, they have a set personality trait that dominates their personality, and they very rarely diverge from that. And I mean, this is apart from our two main heroes and Gabe as well. And so to me, despite being a very minor character, the depth that Felix has exudes main character energy big time. His personality, it's one that's so versatile from a narrative perspective. He can be written as a villain, he can be written as an anti-hero, or just a straight up hero, and it doesn't feel forced, it works. And it feels like it makes sense for the character to behave in these ways based on the personality that's been established. And yet, like I said, he's in under like 10 episodes. It's nuts. It's insane how they've managed to do this. But that isn't the only thing about the way he's written that really just works. I also think there's the fact that he has a really defined and focused character arc compared to basically every other character. It's very efficient and it's very fast paced with a whole heap of development chopped in. And this is both individual developments but also large scale narrative developments, wrapped up in his arc. When we first see Felix, he's your typical villainous type of character. He's a bit of a prick. And randomly, he decides to ruin Adrian's life on a whim. He also pretty much declares war on his uncle from the get-go, stealing his wedding ring, and goes about antagonizing him whenever he gets the chance. In this first episode, they also introduce the mystery of the rings, which is something that's highly focused on Felix's arc. After this, he reconciles with his cousin somewhat, but he is still a bit of a prick, but he refocuses his attention on pursuing his own agenda. At first, he comes across as quite cold and cut off, honestly a bit selfish and self-absorbed. But then we get those layers, his love for his mother and the close bond that they share with each other, and he starts to rekindle his friendship with Adrian, even if it is a little bit strained and standoffish. But he clearly had a shift in his ideals and thoughts, and in many ways, he's acting to protect Adrian from this point onwards, even if he still treats him a bit cruelly and sabotages his life at times. At the same time, we see that Felix also has a strong moral compass, and it's slowly revealed that he's doing all of this in the pursuit of protecting the senti monsters that are currently alive in the world. That he feels extreme grief when a senti monster is destroyed because, they are, as the name would suggest, a sentient creature with feelings, a life, and thus he despises people like Gabe who create and dispose of them readily, and also hates him even more, alongside Kagami's mother, for their attempts to control their children against their will. And this in turn leads him to, he pretty much becomes radicalized and seeks to wipe out life except for senti monsters, only sparing Adrian, Kagami, and in a show of character development, Marinette as well. Because realistically, the Felix we first meet would not have cared that much that Adrian loved this girl and he would have just zapped her too. But he goes out of his way to keep her safe and prevent her from dying, and then in his guilt, he reverses everything immediately once he realizes what's happened. Once he realizes that she's gone and that Adrian's sad about that. And so I think it's very interesting that the character we're seeing now, a character so fundamentally different from the character we first met, still has the same feel. He hasn't just randomly changed out of the blue and feeling out of character, but he has a defined arc that altered the way in which this character interacted with the story and the other characters in a way that made a lot of sense. And yeah, maybe that isn't impressive to you. After all, is this not the case for Marinette and Adrian? And Gabe even? And yeah, it is. There's no doubt that they've had really noticeable arcs that have altered their characters in realistic ways. However, these arcs, they've been so slow and so fat. They are not streamlined, they are not focused. Imagine if Marinette, Adrian, and Gabe had the level of development that Felix got. The show would be insane. But it's still been 5 seasons and we're only just getting to Marinette overcoming her creepiness. That's how long it's taken. They're only just in a relationship now. Ugh. But for Felix, it's only taken a handful of episodes to see that tremendous growth. And because of that, he feels more magnetic, enigmatic, a character you want to watch. He's never boring, he draws your eyes, and consistently brings the best scenes and developments. And on top of that, it's pretty clear the writers seem to love writing him. So it just makes it even better because they're enthusiastic about him. And so yeah, Felix is the best. Felix #1. I love Felix. He's great. Best written character by far. But of course, there's nothing really else to say, and so I will say that these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about Felix? You think he's the best written character in the show? Maybe you disagree. Who would you say? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.